to our Addiction in America series. This is episode 2. So let's just go ahead and get into it, shall we? So, today on our Addiction in America series, I want to talk about a universal truth. No one grows up dreaming about becoming an addict. It isn't akin to becoming the first female president, or an astronaut walking on Mars, or a civil rights attorney who frees the innocent. No one dreams of the kind of life addiction can lead to. So, how does it start? It starts with a single moment. For me, it started with someone I was interested in dating. We'd sit outside on their sidewalk talking for hours. They were a smoker. I wasn't. Then, one night, I took a drag. Then another. Then I bought my own pack. For some people, it's the moment after an injury, a prescription for pain pills that your doctor says that you need. For others, it's a beer at a party that turns into years bellied up to a bar, feeding a need you never knew you were going to have. Addiction doesn't announce itself. It arrives quietly, disguised as relief, curiosity, or connection. And before you realize it, that one moment becomes a pattern. Then the pattern becomes a need. And the need becomes a life you'd never planned to live. But what about all those people who take that drag of a cigarette and never go for another? The ones who can have a drink socially and never end up at the bar every night? Or the person who takes pain meds after surgery and never struggles to let go of that prescription? Are they better than the addict? No. Does the addict have an addictive personality? No, not exactly. The truth is, addictive personality disorder is a made up thing. But there are things that raise your risk levels. And they all exist before the moment you try something for the first time. Those things include impulsivity, trauma, loneliness, genetics, environment, the need for relief. You see, addiction doesn't start with weakness, it starts with wiring and with the world that shapes how that wiring fires. We're going to sit with some of those addiction triggers today, but before we do, let me ground us with something simple and true. Every person I've ever met in my entire life has been addicted to something. And I think it's important that we acknowledge that. You see, addiction isn't just about substances. Addiction, if we're going to define it, well, it's a physical or psychological need for a substance or behavior that becomes harmful physically, sociologically, or socially. It can look like a lot of things. It can look like caffeine, like validation, like work, like control. It can also look like the scroll of a phone screen that never ends. Addiction isn't a moral failure, it's a human pattern. One that starts with need, grows through repetition, and hides behind relief. When we start to break down those addiction triggers, it begins to make more sense how we're all addicts. We just classify what's socially acceptable as a vice instead of an addiction. Genetics are maybe the clearest indicator of what kind of addiction you'll have: mainstream or mainline. About half of all addiction risk comes down to this single marker. It isn't the addictive personality we hinted at earlier, it's about how your brain is wired. Specifically, how many dopamine receptors you have. You're like happy vibes in your brain. That's what it comes down to. If you have fewer receptors, everyday pleasures don't hit as hard. You don't get the rush from the smaller things in life: the laugh, the walk, the win, the hug. So your brain starts to look for something stronger, something that feels like enough. And that's where substance addiction often begins. The other 50% comes from those other triggers we talked about: environmental and emotional ones, stress, loneliness, the need to belong. and the way culture normalizes one addiction while condemning another. In more affluent spaces, addiction might look like a curated bourbon collection, endless shopping sprees, or the quiet chase of status. In less affluent spaces, it might look like marijuana, meth, or anything that numbs the same ache. Again, it's not about morality, it's about access. The substance changes, but the need stays the same. Every addiction is a search for relief, and every society decides which forms of relief are acceptable. In the first episode of this series, we talked about how America sold addiction to her people over the counter and then punished those same people for the addiction. Go back and check it out if you haven't seen it yet, because it was the setup to the first use. And that's where the divide disappears, because whether it's bourbon or meth, shopping or pills, the story always starts the same way, with that moment. A moment that felt harmless, a moment that felt deserved, a moment that felt like connection, or escape, or relief. And that's the first time. The instant when something outside of you suddenly feels like the answer to something inside of you. Again, it's the instant when something outside of you feels like the answer to something inside of you. That emptiness, that lack of dopamine hit. And from that point on, it's not about class or culture, it's about chemistry and circumstance. It's about the way one small choice can echo through a lifetime. Every addiction begins with a first time. A first drag, a first pill, a first drink, a first escape. And maybe that moment doesn't look dangerous. Maybe that moment it looks like connection, curiosity, or comfort. But every first time carries an echo. It's the sound of something small, potentially becoming something bigger. Something that starts to shape how we see ourselves and how we survive. Next week, we'll talk about the echo, the spiral of addiction, how the moment that once felt harmless begins to pull you under. Between now and then, I hope we can all take a moment to reflect on how truly human addiction is, how it's something we all face on different levels, and how it changes our lives. Because the story of addiction isn't just about substances and choices. It's about the ways that we seek comfort, connection, and meaning. I hope that landed for you guys. We will see you next week. And when we talk about the spiral, it's going to be a good one. Have a good night.